Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Inclusion Scotland's webinar on climate change, disability and eco-ableism. My name is Susie Fitton and I'm a policy officer for Inclusion Scotland. We're a disabled people's organisation, so we're led by disabled people. And we work to achieve positive changes to policy and practice, essentially to ensure that disabled people are treated as equal citizens in Scotland, and that their rights and their needs and their priorities are taken into account when policy is made. I've been leading on our policy work related to climate change. And a key part of this work is encouraging dialogue between disabled people, policymakers and climate activists and people who work on climate change in Scotland, in order to discuss basically two key things. Firstly, that disabled people stand to be hit very hard by climate change, in the impacts of climate change, globally and nationally and locally, but that many of the climate actions that can be promoted to address climate change and rehabilitate the environment in Scotland, but also elsewhere, may actually, in some cases, make life more difficult for disabled people if their lived experiences and their priorities are not taken into account. So this webinar is really part of that dialogue. And I'm delighted to see so many of you kind of joining up for this discussion today. We've been really encouraged by it. We actually had to increase ticket sales twice, I think, or three times. And we ended up having to put a limit on it because we were kind of thinking it might not be manageable on Zoom if it was too big. So we're really encouraged by that. So thank you very much for giving your time to us today. I'm going to start with a bit of housekeeping and give you the timings for today, so you know how we're going to run the event. Firstly, we'd ask you to stay on mute when you're not speaking today, because we don't want a lot of background noise. And I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday where somebody's dog was barking every time they said something, and I mean, it was absolutely hysterical. We couldn't stop laughing, so it was kind of chaos, really. So if we could ask you to stay on mute when you want to speak during the Q&A or just after the panel have spoken in the introductory session, it would be great if you could either raise your hand physically if you're able to do that, but if not, use the participants tab at the bottom of your screen, and then that will open the participants menu on the right hand side, and you can go to your name and there should be a reactions button and a raise your hand button on that. If anyone's struggling to do that, please just put it in chat and we can assist you directly to do that. We are recording this discussion today because there's lots of people that were really interested in hearing the discussion but couldn't come to the meeting. So we're going to have a recording of the event. Now, if you're not too keen on being seen in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off at any point. We are basically in the process of writing a much more detailed report about climate change and disability inclusion. And this will be kind of work that's underway ahead of COP26, the Conference of the Parties event in Glasgow, that we hope will be held in November of this year. And we want to get a report ready for that, so that disability inclusion is kind of part of the discussion, really. And so we'll be using the recording of this event as material for the report, but your comments, any comments that you make today, will not be attributed directly to you. So feel very free. We want you to feel able to speak freely today. We have a stenographer working with us today, Ailish Murray. So there are captions closed captions that you'll be able to follow if you need to, and the instructions for opening closed captions are in the chat. If anyone's having problems with that, let us know, and we can help you. Now, just to introduce the team today, so obviously my name's Susie and I'm the policy officer, but I'm also joined by Lynn Wham, who is our comms person. And if you have any kind of technical difficulties today, or you're struggling on Zoom, please, and you're able to access chat, please contact Lynn and she should be able to help you with anything that you need. Janice Sheridan's also here. Janice is our events person, and she deals with our membership and partnership work. And Rebecca McGregor's also here to support us, and Rebecca's our research officer. We've produced a briefing for today's event. I hope everyone's managed to see it. If you haven't managed to have a look at it before the meeting, we're going to put it on chat, so that should be available during the meeting if you want to have a look at that. In terms of timings, we'll hear from the panel in the first session until about 11:45. And then we'll have a break between 11:45 and 12 o'clock, 15-minute break. I know being on Zoom can be very exhausting actually for many people, so we just want to make sure that you get a break away from the screen and an opportunity to go and make a drink, or just take a break. So we'll take a break from between 11:45 and 12, and then we'll have a Q&A session with the panel until around 12:30. We might extend that by about 10 minutes if there's lots of kind of conversation and chat going on, but again, I'll try and keep us to time if possible. We already have some questions which have been submitted to the panel, but if you have a question that you would like to ask, having heard the panel members speak this morning and maybe listen to questions in the second session, then please raise your hand at the time, or use the icon to raise your hand, or put the questions in chat. So without kind of further ado, I'm delighted to be joined by 4 awesome women today on our panel, who I know have interesting views and experiences and perspectives to share about climate change, disability and equality. So firstly, we have Elizabeth Wright here with us today. Elizabeth is an editor, a consultant, a speaker and disability activist. She brings forth all of her life experience as a disabled woman to challenge people around disability, representation and inclusion. Elizabeth has written insightfully about eco-ableism. I'm going to put up the article that she's written into chat as soon as I can, and it's also referenced in the briefing. We're also joined by Alice Gardner, who has joined us from Washington, DC this morning. So she's basically got up probably about 5 o'clock this morning to join us. So I'm really delighted to have Alice with us today. I can't thank her enough. That's a true commitment to the issue, if ever I've heard it. Alice is an artist and disability activist, and is also referenced in an article about eco-ableism, which is in the briefing as well. We're also joined by Katrina Randell, who coordinates Young Friends of the Earth Scotland, which is a network of climate and social justice activists who are aged between 16 and 30 in Scotland. And they have a working group that are tackling issues of ableism and more within the climate movement through their accessing and inclusion working group, where disabled, chronically ill and neurodivergent young people and others are working to improve climate action and create change in the wider movement. So thank you so much, Katrina, for joining us today. And lastly, we're delighted to have Dr. Kat Jones with us. Kat is the COP26 project manager at Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, a coalition of 60 civil society organisations from NGOs and development charities to community groups, trade unions, student associations and faith groups. And Kat's role is to organise and coordinate civil society efforts ahead of COP26 So again, Kat, thank you so much for taking the time today and agreeing to be on our panel. So we're going to hear from Elizabeth first. So Elizabeth, I give you the floor.
Thanks, Susie, so much. Yes, my name is Elizabeth Wright, and I'll just briefly give you a bit of background to myself to begin with. As you can probably tell by the accent, I'm Australian, but I live in the UK. I've lived here in the UK for 11 years now. But for me, myself, I was a Paralympic swimmer for Australia. I represented Australia at 2 Paralympic Games. I've been an artist. I studied fine art at university. When I moved to the UK, I started speaking about disability, Paralympics, inclusion, and kind of leading more and more to kind of talking about disability justice, etc. To this point now where I'm a magazine editor for 3 disability focused magazines, where it's all about amplifying the voice of disabled people and ensuring that representation is being tackled. I'm very passionate about disability representation across the media, across education, across workplaces. And I'm also, as Susie mentioned, a speaker and consultant on inclusion, diversity and disability justice. But underlying all of these things is definitely a love of nature, and a passion for sustainability. So for me, in terms of where that comes from, I have an older sister who for many decades now has been very passionate about sustainability, kind of looking at food waste and all of that stuff. So I've had kind of all of these influences in my life from when I was quite young. So for me, it kind of seemed especially the past 10 years, thinking about disability justice and equality and equity, and seeing how that's playing out across the kind of climate change movement, and the impact that is happening. Sorry, you can tell it's getting near the end of the week, I think. And for me, I think especially being Australian, and also living here and seeing the different impacts that climate change is actually really starting to have on these 2 kind of countries that I really love and that I care about, and where I have family and friends who live, and seeing this impact. You know, in Australia, we've had an increase in bushfires, an increase in temperature. It's when I have gone back to Australia to visit family, quite often it's been over summertime and we've hit temperatures and heat waves consistently of over 40 degrees. You can actually, in terms of experience, tangibly notice the impact of climate change starting to happen. And then obviously, you know, here in the UK, as well as in Australia as well, the increase in floods that are really badly impacting people. And because of my interest in disability justice and climate change, I'm always interested and eager to learn more about the experiences that disabled people are having within those particular countries where my main focus is kind of laying. So for me, with climate change and disability justice, I certainly feel a frustration. And I recognize that certainly, you know, groups like where Katrina's from, as well as Sustainability, which is kind of run out of New Zealand, and you know, other organizations like that are becoming more and more aware, and I think really excitingly looking at how we can increase representation of disabled activists within the movement, as well as understanding access. But for me, certainly looking back over the past 10 years, there's been a frustration. There's so much that I'm doing myself, sorry, excuse me, as an individual. But I certainly don't feel invited or included into the movement per se on that bigger scale. So this is why I think this discussion is really important to have. I think that in terms of eco-ableism, that it is Definitely there. I mean, ableism is threaded throughout all of society. It seems natural that, of course, there will be eco-ableism within this particular movement, because we can't escape ableism wherever we're kind of positioned or are. And so I think it's really important that we have this discussion, that we look at how the UN and COP can actually encourage more disabled people to be involved. I'm going to stop there because I really need to cough. Don't worry, it's not COVID, people. I've been tested and I have had the vaccine, but I'm going to pass it on to the next person, on to Alice.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Alex.
Hi, my name, ready to go?
Go for it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Alice Gardner Bates. I'm a disabled artist and activist. I was raised in Houston, Texas and Bridgend, Wales, splitting my time. But now I live in Washington, D.C. I focus on how ableism and misogyny influenced far-right ideologies online. I wanted to examine eco-ableism in the online response to COVID-19. Unfortunately, when I looked into it, and the more I looked into it, there was almost no line between eco-ableism and eco-fascism in the response to COVID-19. It was not a slippery slope. They were just one and the same. So I think it's very important now that in climate change, we acknowledge how disabled people are marginalized. Obviously, I focus on the language that is used, especially in more casual conversations like Twitter exchanges, where, I have been told specifically in regards to eco-ableism that disabled people should simply do more work to help live more sustainable lives. I did not engage with environmental activism for a very long time because online groups were so hostile to myself and other disabled people. So my biggest concern about climate change is disruption of infrastructure and the ability for disabled people to access medicine and the care they need in times of extreme weather. During the Texas snowstorm that happened in February, 22 of the 200 people that died were people who died when medical devices failed without power, or who were unable to seek life-saving care because of the extreme weather. I'm also concerned again about the increase in the number of disabled people. This was predicted by a myalgic encephalomyelitis group at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, that in a study of the SARS outbreak that happened in Toronto more than 10 years ago, 9% of people who had and survived SARS ended up meeting the criteria a year later for myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. And the full name for COVID is SARS-CoV-19. So this was immediately posited as a concern. And now we do see that being played out with people with long haul COVID and the post-COVID symptoms. If this causes these symptoms to persist, people to get myalgic encephalomyelitis at the same rate as the SARS outbreak in Toronto, we will be looking at about 10 million new cases of people developing ME in the next year. And this is, I did that calculation before the recent spike in India. So now it's likely much higher. And I am concerned about every part of how governments conceptualize and respond to the new needs of their citizens. But there again, I also just go back to the concerns about eco-ableism and eco-fascism online. There's a specific radicalization that happens all over the internet that recently overflowed into the shooting at FedEx in Wisconsin last week. He was not an eco-fascist, but the shooter was part of that same group. So then I just go back to seeing the rise of ableism and misogyny funneling people into not only eco-ableist, eco-fascist ideologies and groups. So that's all for me.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Katrina, can we hear from you?
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, my name's Katrina and I'm the network coordinator of Young Frontier Scotland, which is a grassroots network of young climate activists aged 16 to 30 from across Scotland. So I'll be talking more from a kind of activist perspective and a climate activist perspective. And my kind of chat today is drawing on the thoughts of our Access and Inclusion Working Group, which, as Susie said, is made up of disabled, neurodivergent and chronically ill young people and allies. I'll be doing my best to kind of represent their thoughts and do them justice. They are an incredible group of people. I myself am also chronically ill, but I don't often have issues physically moving through the world. So when it comes to kind of questions later on, I might defer to other panelists for some of them. But yeah, I am reading from kind of like notes of all our different thoughts. So I will try and make sure I don't go too fast, but please like flag up if I am in the chat. So yeah, when our group first discussed the concept of eco-ableism, the first response was along the lines of, well, obviously, we live in a world that only meets the needs of some specific people, a world of systemic ableism. Eco-ableism is just plain old ableism. It's exactly because we live in an ableist world that climate change disproportionately affects disabled people. When we discussed our concerns around climate change as disabled and sick people, the fears came up go way broader than, sustainable behaviours being exclusionary. We talked about whose lives are valued, as COVID has made clearer than ever, and as Alice was talking about just there. We talked about who struggles to cross borders, who gets left behind, who gets forgotten. Ableism is in everything. Ableism is in climate change and in climate activism and in climate solutions because it's in everything, as Liz said. Oppressions will always be reflected in social movements unless an active effort is made to unlearn and to do better. Is there ableism in the climate movement? Absolutely. Is this unique to the climate movement? Absolutely not. At the same time, to not act on climate change is also ableism. The climate crisis is an ableist crisis because of the disproportionate effects suffered by disabled people. When we looked more into the term eco-ableism, we found that lots of the examples given were often of sustainable changes to habit and to lifestyle, or of individual behavior change being being ableist, being exclusionary. To us, individual behavior change as a climate solution is always going to be ableist and exclusionary. A one-size-fits-all solution isn't going to work. There are so many marginalizations that lead to kind of barriers with engaging with individual behavior change. And more importantly, it puts the onus on people and on individuals rather than the systems and the powers that are causing the problem. I think many of us will be familiar with the statistic that 71% of all emissions are caused by just 100 companies. Climate change is a systemic issue with systemic solutions. In fact, climate and ableism are both systemic issues, and it's the same system. The system that undervalues disabled bodies and minds also undervalues the environment. It's never a case of climate versus disability. The two are inherently intertwined. So we talked about kind of what now, and the first thing we talked about was system change. We need to really be addressing we need to be not just addressing the symptoms, but the root causes of climate change and social inequality. We need to get serious about system change, questioning our economic system, our political system, our justice system. We need a radical new future and not just tweaks to the status quo. And yeah, how do we build a future that meets everyone's needs? We have to imagine that together. We have to dream up these new systems together and come up with solutions that meet everyone's needs and tackle the climate crisis. And in order to do that, the climate movement needs to get serious about access and inclusion, with broad access options as standard in our spaces. There are roles for everyone. Disabled voices need to be included and centred. Marginalised folk can't just be an afterthought, not just consulted on plans already made. They need to be setting the agenda, shaping the demands, helping to create solutions that meet everyone's needs. We can't build a future for everyone without everyone. In the climate movement, we often talk about climate justice, which is a term which frames climate change as an ethical, social and political issue, not just an environmental one. We need to start situating ableism as part of our climate justice narratives, understanding it as part of the system, understanding it as structural, and looking at how it shapes our society, as we're beginning to do better with on other issues. We need more education in the climate movement and better understanding from non-disabled folk, able-bodied folk who are already in the climate movement. And I think creating kind of spaces for discussion like this one, like the Disability Caucus and the COP26 Coalition are so important. The climate movement has so much to learn from disability justice movement, from its campaigners and organisers, from its history. Groups like Disabled People Against the Cuts, actions by Campaign for Accessible Transport and the Disabled People's Direct Action Network in the 90s are just great examples, and so much to learn. Disabled people have a powerful voice and so much to offer the fight against the climate crisis, and we would love to see a better relationship between these movements. For us, COP is an opportunity to grow and strengthen the climate movement in Scotland. No matter the outcome of the talks, it's a chance to shake up how we do things, get more folk in, to build relationships, to grow narratives, build collective power. And we would love to see this moment used as an opportunity to make a more accessible movement with better narratives on climate and disability. There's so much more I could say. We talked about way more than I have time to chat about now, but yeah, I'll end with talking a little bit about our approach. As a group of activists situated already kind of within the climate movement, we're focusing on improving access and inclusion in climate spaces, in our own spaces and more broadly, doing education on disability justice, power and privilege, understanding access and inclusion. And we really hope that we can create better spaces where we can dream new futures and mitigate harms together. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Kat Jones, could we hear from you now?
Yes, well, I think you'll find a lot of this has already been said, especially by Katrina there, probably a lot more eloquently. So I think I'll be touching on a lot of the same themes that Katrina just said. So thanks so much for inviting me to take part in this. This is such an incredibly important conversation to be having, particularly at this time when we've got COP26 coming to Scotland, and also when those discussions on how we build back better after COVID are happening. We need to get it right. It's vital we recognise mistakes that have been made in the past and are still being made, and ensure that we're mainstreaming the voice of disabled people into all of the policy work that is happening. So my attention was raised about the importance of disability in climate discussions when I was at COP25 in Madrid. I was there for a bit of a fact-finding trip to sort of do a bit of research ahead of COP26 to find out what kind of things we should be expecting when COP comes to Glasgow. And I met Sebastian, I think it's Jodoin, he's a law professor at McGill University and also a disability activist. And we had a really good chat. You might have seen him at the webinar we did on disability and climate justice a few months ago. Susie was also one of the speakers on that. And this has led to all sorts of other collaborations and things that are happening and still going on, which is really exciting. So I'm really very much at the start of my journey in this area. So for me, this is really all about the listening rather than the speaking, which for those who know me will know that's uncharacteristic for me, because I'm never backward in coming forward. But I'm really looking forward to the discussion and hearing people's experiences. I'm really glad this event's being recorded, because most of my colleagues from the NGOs that are members of SCCS are in our twice yearly all coalition meeting, and so they can't be here. So I've managed to Skype that to take part in this, which is quite good. But I'll also be sending around this recording to them all and ensuring that they watch it, because I think this is going to be a really, really important discussion for everybody in the climate movement to be listening to. So the issue of eco-ableism, where discrimination against those with disabilities by environmentalists, either through policies that badly affect disabled people or by being made to feel that they aren't green enough, really has to be dealt with urgently. It's not something we can tolerate in a just society. From my understanding of the issues, some of the eco-ableism comes from the worldview that being environmentally friendly or saving the planet is down to individual action and behaviour change. You know, the messages we've been getting over the past decade at least or more is recycle more, drive less, don't take a straw, take public transport, and then we'll sort out climate change. But we're not going to sort out climate change by doing little individual actions like this. Putting the burden for the climate crisis on individuals takes away the onus on the big baddies in the room, as Katrina said, the big polluters, those that finance the way that the system works, the vested interests, the governments. We've been talking about behaviour change and consumer choice for so long, it's actually very hard for us to see what impacts this way of thinking has. So firstly, the obvious one is guilt. Everyone feels guilty because they can't do everything, and that causes them to feel powerless to act. And this is across society. You know, it's hearing the experiences of Alice and Elizabeth. You know, it's obviously that's very, very strong in the disabled people, but it is also a symptom of everybody across society is being made to feel like they should do more, but they don't know how to do it, and then they feel powerless to act and just give up. Is tokenism. I mean, I've not taken a straw, so that's great. I'm a green superstar. Let's see if I can get that weekend to Prague booked on EasyJet. You know, it's this sort of like, I've done something, so that's fine. There's injustice. You know, the burdens are being placed on the individuals who have the least ability to deliver the change, and it deflects from the real issues. People are made to feel like they can't have an opinion or speak out on climate unless they personally have a minuscule carbon footprint. It discredits people's voices and real experiences. And this approach of individual responsibility, although it's well meant by some, it's been really exploited by those with vested interests to avoid changing the things that would make a real difference. So plastic straws are the ultimate example. I mean, having caused so much pain and exclusion to disabled people, if you actually look at it, take a step back, the ambition of removing straws from everyday life is just so obviously tokenistic when you compare with the monumental climate and nature emergency we're trying to solve. It's actually changing the system that we really need. The influential IPCC report, you might know of, 1.5 degree report, stated that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees would require rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. So that doesn't mean making changes in individual choices, it means wholesale change. So we need to move from a behaviour change and individual change model to a climate justice centred approach where we look at the whole system and the issue of climate crisis as just one of many symptoms of an unjust system, which is designed to enrich a small proportion of people at the expense of other people and the planet. So ableism, racial injustice, social injustice, and the climate and nature and COVID crises have a common thread. And we need to join the dots to work on creating solutions that tackle the root cause of the many injustices that we see in the world. We can't tackle a climate crisis without tackling the exclusion of disabled people. So where do we start? So as Katrina so very eloquently said, we need to join up the movements. I mean, I've seen personally just in the last few months how effective, determined and passionate disability activists are. They get things done. You know, we need to bring together the work that you are doing and we are doing and make a difference that will change things towards a justice-centred approach. We also need disabled people in the decision-making space for the environment and climate. So firstly, I'd like to issue an open invitation to any groups out there, disabled people organisations or others, to join SCCS. You know, we have community groups as members, NGOs as members, trade unions, faith groups. We'd really welcome people from the disability justice community to come and join us. We need to have the disabled activists around the table when we are devising our policy proposals and campaigns. It's no good having someone as effective and amazing as Susie having to spend all her time undoing poor policy decisions that are kind of made in a room where we don't have any voices from disability groups. So we need to make sure it's our responsibility to get those in there and make sure that we put out the right policy, good policy and not rubbish policy that then Susie has to go and undo. So also it goes without saying that we should have people with disabilities, lived experience of disability in senior decision-making positions throughout society. That would really also help us to get better decisions being made. But change is in the air, and disabled activists have been working for many years to be recognised as a formal constituency of COP. And there's the formal constituencies are things like women and gender, there's NGOs, there's youth, there's youth constituency, there's lots of others. And this would recognise the particular vulnerability of people with disabilities to climate, and also the crucial importance of hearing their voice within the formal UNFCCC processes. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in this. There's loads that the Scottish Disability Movement can contribute to this, and I hope getting involved in this international campaign with disability activists all over the world. And I really hope that we can, at SCCS, we can link closer with disability groups to join up the movements and to make those better policy proposals that will take us to below 1.5 degrees rise. I want to point out, just before I finish, and I'll put the link in the chat, that as Katrina mentioned, there is a kind of caucus being built up by the COP26 Coalition, which is a group of civil society groups and activists. And they've got a meeting on Sunday. So Saturday at 12 o'clock. And it would be amazing if people could go along. It's called Disability Justice and the Climate Crisis. They want to create a caucus of disabled people in the run-up to COP. So I'll post that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was fantastic. And thank you very much to everyone else on the panel. Elizabeth, Katrina and Alice, really interesting perspectives. It's really got me thinking about a whole range of things, particularly this kind of the systems change. And I think it's one of the exciting things about working to promote disability inclusion within the kind of climate action and climate justice movements is about talking about whole systems change. You've mentioned this need to unlearn and do better, and that the climate crisis is an ableist crisis, and I think it's this kind of, it's one of these, after basically since before the onset of coronavirus, climate change was probably for many people the kind of defining issue of our time, and it will be again. And I think it's about learning lessons from a whole range of things. It's about learning the lessons that disabled people can teach us about our responses to COVID-19 for a start. We have done a lot of research that has uncovered that disabled people have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Alice, you made some very interesting points about that, and about the potential for disabled people to be impacted by long COVID and by COVID. Our research found that disabled people across Scotland were having their social care removed as a response to COVID-19, that they were concerned about losing their jobs, that they were thrust into caring responsibilities. And actually many of these lessons around dealing with an emergency highlight for so many people what their concerns are about the climate emergency as well, that disabled people's needs and priorities will be overlooked, and that policy will be made without them. We know that zero carbon policy making is really moving very quickly up the agenda in Scotland particularly, and that efforts to reduce emissions and tackle pollution and create a circular economy will in effect be the backbone of policy making for the foreseeable future. The problem being, and I think we'll hopefully discuss some of these things after the break, is that many of the issues, many of the things promoted to create a net zero economy, so things like town centre planning that promotes active travel, integrated transport, various other things around recycling, reusing, all of those issues can create impairment related barriers for disabled people. We need to make sure that zero carbon policymaking and sustainability is actually inclusive, and it doesn't directly disadvantage and disproportionately discriminate against disabled people. And I hope that we can talk about some of these particular issues after the break. Listen, welcome back everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Inevitably, we've lost a few people who've got various other commitments that they need to C2, but thank you very much for joining us for the second session. So this part of the meeting is really to hear a bit more from you guys and from the audience. We are doing a Q&A with the panel, and some people have submitted questions ahead of the event. So we've got 3 questions that we're going to deal with, but in some ways we've kind of already answered some of these questions already. So we might have a bit more time to hear from you after that. So the first question for the panel is, do you think the concept of eco-ableism is understood by those keen to see action to address climate change? Elizabeth, what do you think about this one?
I think it has kind of in a way been answered a little bit, but when I've thought about this, I jotted down a few notes. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes just to check. But it's again kind of what so many of us have alluded to already, is that eco-ableism is ableism. I mean, ableism is so systemic throughout society. It's in every single aspect of our life we encounter ableism. So of course there is going to be eco-ableism out there. But I think what it has to become about is raising that awareness. And it can be really hard because as we know with ableism in general, there are a lot of non-disabled people and organizations, governments that do not listen to the concerns and issues that we have. So it's really, I guess, looking at what has worked before, perhaps in other areas, and how we can apply that to the kind of ecological activism and climate change activism movement. For me, I think it comes down a lot to policy. So it's how we kind of work with governments as well as organizations that are tackling this. And it's not just about the solution side of things, but also when a climate disaster happens. So what processes are in place that are actually there to support people. I know certainly there was an article I read last year with the bushfires in Australia, which I happened to be there for when it was happening. And in this article, there was a woman who lives with MS and her mother who lives with dementia, and they were living on a farm and they had to evacuate. They were told they had to evacuate. They went to the evacuation center and it was not set up in any way, shape or form in terms of accessibility. So in the end, they decided to risk it and go back home because they knew that they had what they needed to kind of get through the absolute basics of day-to-day life back at their home. That is, obviously very much a scary illustration of in terms of the kind of the other side of when the disasters are actually happen, in how that can negatively impact disabled people. So we have to really kind of from that starting point of, okay, well, how do we work at limiting the impact of climate change right through to, okay, what is actually happening when there is a climate disaster and how we're actually supporting disabled people through that whole process. I think we also have to, and I think we've touched a little bit on this as well, but I want to bring up the concept of lateral ableism, and that can be expressed in multiple ways. I think especially online, we've talked with kind of Alice has spoken about being online and the kickback that she's gotten from people. And what I find interesting is that there are some disabled people out there who either don't want to know about climate change and the impact that it's actually going to have on their lives, and may also kick back towards disabled activists within this area. And I think that has to be addressed as well, because as we've established, climate change is going to impact every single one of us and disproportionately will impact disabled people. It has to be a concern for disabled people to address alongside access and inclusion. It has to be, if you want to look at 3 issues that disabled people have to be fighting for, it has to be access, inclusion and the impact of climate change. So I think we have to address kind of those things as well. So yeah, that's kind of my extended thoughts on that question that maybe haven't been quite addressed already.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Katrina, can we hear from you? Just do you think that this concept of eco-ableism is widely understood, and what more can we do to make it so?
No, I don't think it is within the wider climate movement. I think that the climate movement has historically been largely made up of privileged people, of able-bodied people, white people, middle-class people, often people who don't have to spend the rest of their time organising for their own rights and their own survival. The history of the climate movement or of the environmental movement, like it's not pretty, and it's exclusionary, and so it's not surprising that there's little understanding within it. I think that there is an increasing awareness though of how it disproportionately affects people of like different marginalizations and including disability. But I think that it is often really a shallow understanding and often a very tokenized understanding. I think a lot of it has come through the kind of plastics debate and the plastic straw debate. Like that's the only time I really see people bringing up disabled people and their rights, and often it's in such a tokenistic way, and often it's used by non-disabled people to derail the conversation rather than actually trying to bring like kind of depth and understanding. Like people be like, we can't ban straws because some people need them, therefore I'm going to shut down this whole conversation about plastic waste. And that's still tokenizing and not actually listening to the needs of disabled people. And yeah, I think that there needs to be just way better, just more people in the climate movement from just lots of different backgrounds, and also just better education within the movement of disability justice, and so many different things. And I guess I see like Young Friends of the Earth Scotland is a space, it's mostly a learning space for young people, for young activists, knowledge around climate justice, campaigning skills, all of these things. And for that reason, like I see us as a really important space for putting these things out there, because these young people come to us, they learn skills, gain knowledge, and then they go out into the wider movement, into different groups, into different positions, and they kind of take what they learn with us with them. And I see young people as just like a really important part of this, to go out and create change. And there's so many young people passionate about climate. So yeah, we're really trying to increase that understanding, and to hopefully improve things. But yeah, overall, I don't think it's currently well understood, and we can't not talk about these things.
Alice, I'm going to bring you in if that's okay. I'm really keen to hear from you. We've got a specific question in chat for you, actually. People have been wanting to ask you to explain a bit more about eco-fascism and what you mean by eco-fascism. Would you be able to do that?
Yes, if I could just quickly build on what they were saying about awareness of eco-ableism, and especially lateral ableism, because, you know, I'm very online. That is what I watch, and that is what I focus on. And just following the treatment of 3 Black disabled women who talked about all parts, you know, of their intersecting identities and care about climate change, and the horrific pushback and harassment they receive. It can also be difficult in these situations, I've seen, to make people go beyond considering eco-ableism to the intersections, which is when you look at the experiences of Imani Barbarin, Kia Brown, and Haben Girma, and just the colossal harassment that they have received. So I did want to say, you know, yes, I think lateral ableism is a problem, but then also how ableism I've seen almost be used to shut down intersecting issues that come along with that. And I'd be happy to put their names in chat, because they're just incredible writers who are worth paying attention to. But as for what ecofascism is, it is an ideology that blames environmental issues on overpopulation, immigration, and over-industrialization. And it proposes that it could be remedied through the mass murder of refugees in Western countries. Ecofascism argues that climate change is God's will and that there are too many people, so there should be a great purge and perhaps it's all for the best. It's environmentalism through genocide. It's using environmental concerns that are real to bring in fascist ideologies and policies. The two ways you see it most commonly in 2020 and 21 is, you know, focusing on it, just extremely strengthening borders and trying to completely shut down migration and immigration, and the idea of acceptable deaths from COVID, because this is fascism, so only the weak are dying. So that is what eco-fascism is, and it is on the rise, just in how people are talking, what they're talking about online. It is really spreading. It's incredibly concerning.
Okay, thanks so much, Alice. I'm going to take because we've covered quite a lot of the stuff in the 3 questions that were submitted. The third question was what disabled people's organisations and others can do to give disabled people a voice on these issues. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I'd like to bring in a question from Sonia Rutherford. Sonia, are you actually here? Yes.
Hi, I'm here. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
Sonia. Yes, thank you. So Sonia submitted a really pertinent question about active travel schemes in Scotland. And this has been kind of, I can see that this discussion's going on in chat as well. So I was really keen to kind of talk about this. So we've got active travel schemes in Scotland, such as Spaces for People and Places for Everyone. And Inclusion Scotland have been receiving a fair bit of anecdotal evidence that these schemes, which are kind of essentially to widen pedestrianised areas in city centres as a result of the pandemic and the social distancing measures, but we're getting evidence that they're causing particular problems for disabled people with mobility impairments. So blue badge parking spaces are being removed. Buses are no longer able to stop at curbsides, and buses can't use ramps to help disabled people enter and exit buses. And there's few dropping off places for taxis. But Sonia's got a particular question about this, and I'd like to maybe discuss it as a whole group if we can. Sonia, could you give us a bit more on this?
Yes, absolutely. I could give you lots of depth, but I'll just give a very quick summary of the background. I'm part of a community group at Southwest Edinburgh Motion that formed in November as a response to the Spaces for People plans for our immediate local area. We as a committee are committed to active travel. We've embedded it in our lives for years, but some of us in the committee have mobility issues or are carers for people with disabilities. So we're seeing both sides of the issue here. The plans for our local roads were positioned as emergency COVID response, and they impacted about 4.5 miles of carriageway. And they, I'd say due to the use of language around these schemes, they were positioned as being around walking, wheeling and cycling. So we didn't realise the extent of the problem for several weeks. Our scheme had been designed by Sustrans, and it removed every single parking space in 4.5 miles for anyone with mobility issues or requiring a blue badge. We didn't have many specific blue badge spaces before because the road was so wide and there was ample parking. So there wasn't a need. We had a formal request to add a blue badge space, was declined on the basis I don't think it would be possible to consider the introduction of a disabled bay for a local resident and less so for a visiting family member due to the proposed layout. And when I requested a set of plans marking on where disabled people could park, after 5 weeks I was refused that and told I could deduce where the spaces were from technical drawings, and then it turned out there were none. So my question is, there's very low awareness, I think, of the concept and issue of eco-ableism, and specifically the serious issues that these schemes are causing. Bear in mind, the majority of the budget in Edinburgh has been spent on schemes which reduce curbside access to parking. But in communications around them, there's extensive use of the word wheeling. particularly when describing the schemes as being designed to support walking, wheeling and cycling. And this is sometimes accompanied by icons or photography related to mobility, such as people in wheelchairs or elderly people. And I've got a picture of an advert here for a consultation on the scheme I'm holding up. This is a big bus stop advert, and the two icons in the middle are a person in a wheelchair and elderly people. So it's almost looking like the schemes are centred around disabled people. People assume wheeling means wheelchairs. In fact, when it's used, the people using it are often referring to prams or scooters, totally different. This assumption can then be compounded with brand names such as Spaces for People or Places for Everyone, which implies to anyone who doesn't know that these are fully inclusive. But the funding guidelines for the likes of these schemes for Places for Everyone, for example, prioritises schemes that also restrict motor vehicle access. And we think this is impacting, this perception is impacting even the accuracy of internal documents. So this is our Edinburgh Council weekly roadworks and events report. There's 20 schemes listed in here as helping wheelchair access. I've circled some, but they've got not a single thing to help wheelchair access, and they actually prevent wheelchair access. So my question after that was, to what extent are the public being misled that these active travel initiatives are actually designed for people with mobility issues? And does this misunderstanding potentially lead to greater support for these measures than would otherwise be the case?
So I'm going to ask the panel if anyone's got any reflections on this, and then I'm going to ask, sorry,
Susie, go on.
And then I'm going to ask the audience if anyone else has got anecdotal evidence of this, because this is something that is extremely concerning. And as an organisation, we need to be responding to it. I mean, we actually had so we've got blue badge parking outside our office on Lothian Road in Edinburgh, and we're a disabled people's organisation, and many of the people that come to our office have mobility impairments and need a blue badge parking space, and those spaces were removed temporarily, we were told, as part of a Spaces for People scheme. So we, as an organisation, we're particularly concerned about this. Kat, would you have any reflections on this?
So I totally agree. This is really, really concerning. What I'm thinking is this is being done out of pure ignorance on the people who are doing it, in that they don't realise what they're doing, because I can't kind of come up with any other reason for why they would do this. You know, Katrina very eloquently said about, you know, that really a lot of my colleagues and myself, we're made up of people with, you know, without disabilities, without, you know, difficulties in our lives necessarily. So we're not, you know, that's just what we need to be more aware of our privilege. I think that's what the message is for this. And I almost can't believe it. I was actually really horrified to think they'd actually take out disabled parking places. Like, why would anybody do that? So I think this needs to be tackled, not just by disabled people's organisations, but by, you know, the climate movement. We have to, you know, the big NGOs have to step up and say, you know, we didn't mean this. When we said, you know, put in places for cycling and walking, we didn't mean take out the ability for disabled people to get around to their hometowns. Like, that is not the intention at all. So I think we should probably potentially work on this together as a bit of a campaign or something. I think there's definitely room for that.
Great. Gary.
Can I just say, Susie?
Oh, sorry.
As well. Yeah, I just want to say, I think as well that there's, it's almost like you can say that non-disabled society in a way is being brainwashed, because so much of the signage and language around disability is about wheelchairs, and it's not to disparage wheelchair users at all, but I know certainly here in the UK, only approximately, I think it's here in the UK, only approximately 8% of the disabled population are wheelchair users. So I think when a lot of these kind of schemes and that arise, they think, oh, we've ticked the wheelchair box, or we're showing like that, you know, we're being fully accessible and inclusive because we've got wheelchair access. But in that sense, then they're completely disregarding a majority of the disability population who maybe a ramp isn't necessarily going to be helpful, or maybe this isn't necessarily going to be helpful. so that's the thing I think with eco-ableism, is that a lot of the time they focus on this very limited understanding of what disability is, and they think they're ticking all the boxes because they're meeting this very limited idea of what disability is, when actually the disability is a very deep and broad kind of community and collective of experiences.
Fantastic. I'm going to bring Gary and then Linda in if I can.
Yeah, the wheelchair issue, I'm involved with the Dublin City Council Transport and Traffic Strategic Policy Committee as a representative of the Public Participation Network, loads of names. I'm basically the vulnerable pedestrian community rep on this, and I've fought against everything that everybody's saying here. The moving of disabled parking spaces, the active travel issue. Active travel I call able travel, because nowhere in any of the documentation is disability inclusion involved. And it stems back to a thing called tactical urbanism, where they stick these things in and they sort of stay. That's what's happening already with what they've done for COVID in Dublin, and it'll happen everywhere. And it's an ongoing concept. Now, I'm dealing with the council at chief executive and planners and chief architects, and they do not take in at any level disability inclusion into any of the designs. Tactical urbanism is a whole idea of planners. It's this open space, shared space, cyclists going everywhere, all this sort of stuff. And we've argued against it, and they just do not consider it. As I say, disability inclusion for planners and designers and councillors, and I've seen Edinburgh. I've checked Edinburgh. The cycling manual from the Edinburgh Council on my system here, which I've checked to use as examples of bad design. They don't consider it at all. And ableism, I hate having to use the word because people can get upset because you're putting ism to their name, and that's always a bad sign. But that's what it is, and it's subconscious ableism. They don't realize, they don't understand, and that's what I've been fighting. But everything you're saying is 100% true, and we need to work together. I'll get in touch. You have my details. Get in touch with me, because I want to work with people. I'm working with people. It might seem not a big distance to you down in Cork, but from Dublin, it's a hell of a long way. But then again, I was the person. I'm sure you know Gavin Neat.
Yes.
I'm a friend of Gavin's. I brought Neatbox to Dublin. I got the Gavin to come. We have it in a railway station now, in our main railway station. That's it. And the disability thing is, disability access for councils is dropped curbs and tactile paving. Intellectual disabilities, forget it. Mobility issues, forget it. If a planner's idea of disability inclusion is to drop a curb, put some tactile pavement, box ticked, and on they go. We need to be involved from design from concept, and that's where they're refusing to do that. So that's what we're fighting for here, and that's why I came onto this. But now they're using the green stick to beat us with that. It's all eco. It's for saving the planet. And 5 of the 30 goals on the UN SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, 5 of them specifically mention disability inclusion, and one of them uses the words, "Do not leave the disability community behind."
Mm-hmm.
And that we have to hit them back with their own Bible. The US SDG is what they say is perfect, but it says there, don't forget us. And what happened with you has happened in Dublin, happened all around the country with the parking spaces. In Dublin, they moved them and they put
Gary, I'm so sorry. We will catch up afterwards. I'm so sorry. I'm just
sorry. I'll catch up afterwards because I've got another computer here on the go too. Sorry,
right,
but
okay.
Linda, this is happening everywhere. So we have to work and we have to do something, because otherwise it's going to happen, and we're going to have to fight to get it all taken out again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey,
Linda,
sorry.
That's fine. Thank you so much for your contribution. Linda, are you wanting to speak? Linda, you're on mute at the minute.
I'm all right now, aren't I?
You are, yeah.
Just that I really wanted to say that this problem happens in Stirling. And and I just want you to just quickly explain a couple of issues, and over parking and over queuing. It's quite common to go out with my support worker who has to drive the car, because I can't drive anyway. We have to find a parking space, and very often we can't find anywhere because either they've been taken away because there are roadworks, or I've very often found people using these spaces who don't have a blue badge in the first place, and that's even included council vehicles as well. So that's the first problem. The second problem, if I may suggest it at this point when I'm speaking, is the queuing up. Now we're talking about COVID and climate change, and we're talking about the future, looking at all these issues. Probably queuing is going to be one that will stay for a while, because we can't have too many people in one place at a time. There are no allowances. Trying to queue up when you're not in a wheelchair, but you're either on crutches or you're on a special wheelchair that you can, a special walking frame, so that maybe you can sit down for a couple of minutes on the thing. But it's very comfortable, very uncomfortable, and very difficult. So no, you can't get the car park close to where you need to be. And if you're queuing up, for instance, to the bank, you might have to wait quite a long time. I think this is totally wrong in every access. And what I would like to suggest is that there is some kind of education out there. Either put somebody in a wheelchair and let them see what it's like, or having to walk on a walking frame and walking stiffly and awkwardly with pain all day, and just to help them understand why these are needs, why we require this in order to carry on our business in the community.
Thanks so much, Linda. So really pertinent points there. I think this probably, we could actually dedicate an entire event to issues around active travel and issues around kind of town planning and kind of radical urbanism, if you like, that creates situations like this for disabled people. I'm going to extend the meeting by 10 minutes, if that's okay with everybody, because there's two people that I'd like to bring in, and there's a question in chat that I would like to quickly ask. So Annie, can I hear from you? And then Dennis, I'll hear from you.
Yes, I'm a member of the Edinburgh Access Panel, and Robin Wicks, our deputy chairman, is vice chair, is actively engaging with the council on the spaces for people aspect, because the bus stops and the parking areas that are floating are absolutely lethal, and very often the floating parking areas aren't even near a drop curve for people with a wheelchair. But the other thing that also concerns me, because I've been involved in writing a book on air quality, is that with the spaces for people, those that really need to use a car, people getting to work before buses are running, people that can't walk very far and have to pick something up, etc., are having to do very much longer journeys, which means air pollution down busy streets. And actually one of the worst things for particularly children in pushchairs and people that walk slowly or are in a wheelchair on a pavement is that air pollution from traffic is hitting them right where they're sitting, because they're at the level of exhaust. So it's a very big concern. And I think spaces for people has been incredibly badly thought out. So we are trying to pursue these, but it's not always easy.
No, I can imagine it isn't. Annie, I know Robin, actually.
Yes.
We've been in touch over the years. So I'll have a real think after the meeting about what we can do collectively on this. I mean, actually, it's our sister organisation, our member organisation, Disability Equality Scotland, who deal more with access issues than we do, really. But I think it's time to kind of take collective action on this, isn't it?
I think so. And the sad thing was that the consultation that was put out for people to respond to is at a time when one couldn't travel from one part of a city to another to see what the effects were. So all you could do basically was talk about your own area and put comments in boxes, which is very frustrating.
Yeah.
The other quick point I just wanted to make, as a designer and architect who's worked in this field for very many years for people with disabilities, is that if we can get the message out there that designing for disability actually helps everyone, people that are dyslexic, people of foreign country, people with children in in buggies, etc., in addition to people with disabilities, it works for everyone. So there shouldn't be this discriminatory outlook on design. The problem is that many designers say, oh, designing for people with disabilities, that's ugly, it doesn't work. Good signage that shows a toilet on it as well as the word, oh no, that's not very nice. So there's a lot to do with education. That's a big point, and I'd like to be able to get this message into schools of architecture and design as well, because it's so important that they understand what it's like if you can't manage.
Absolutely.
That's my little rant over.
Thanks, Danny. Dennis, can we hear from you? And then I'm gonna ask one question I'm gonna ask if Alex Davey can ask it, actually, because it's a really important question and one that I think would be good to finish on. Dennis, let's hear from you.
Well, I think that you know, saving the planet is a consciousness. We've got to have intelligence. So there was a problem, you know, during the COVID when they weren't emptying the bins. So I devised a method called the Russian doll method of recycling. And what I do is I have little tubs with my Meals on Wheels, and I put containers in there. I fill this full to capacity, put a plaster on it, because what happens in your bin, it's the air takes the majority of the capacity of your bin. So I put this in the blue bin, and in bottles, I either just put the stuff in there like little fritters and receipts, because all the receipts would go into your green bin, which is costing the council a fortune because it's landfill. The green bin is my enemy, or I would cut something there and put stuff inside it and then plaster it. For instance, I've got this ready I've got this big bin in here. Let's say there was something like cling film and you put it in your green bin, it sticks to the sides and it's absolutely horrible, and then you're left with it. And then it goes into the landfill and it doesn't go away very easily. So what I do with things like that, polystyrene, I put them in the big thing and plaster it. And they say, well, that's a bottle. So what happens? That goes in the recycling plant and gets burned. So I would rather see things get burned rather than being put into your landfill, which is costing the councils a lot of money. I live in Falkirk, by the way, and I'm actually a presenter with Stirling City Radio. So I do radio broadcasting.
Dennis, thanks so much for that. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
Apologies for that. I'm just quite keen to end on a final question. Alex Davey, are you here? Would you be able to ask the question, or would you prefer me to ask it?
I wasn't expecting to speak, but I could give it
Sorry,
a go.
I don't mind. I just thought you might want to. I don't mind asking it if that would be your preference.
No, sure. I've unmuted now, so I'll give it a go. It was simply that I totally agree with what the panel have been saying about shifting the focus from individual behaviours to a sort of systemic climate justice approach to this, which is great, and I totally agree with it. But I find that a bit disempowering as an individual, knowing what I can do to bring about that systemic change. So just wondering whether perhaps each of the main speakers had like one key thing that I can do as an individual that will actually bring about that change, or at least move us towards it. Does that make sense?
No pressure, panel.
I think for me as an individual who's been trying to make individual change alongside addressing the kind of wider systemic change is and this is just what I do on a day-to-day basis, is I just look at what is accessible and what works for me, and making choices based on that knowledge that I get from what I read. So for me, you know, it could be something as small and simple as, I know I can physically use a bamboo toothbrush, so I make the choice to buy a biodegradable bamboo toothbrush as opposed to a plastic one. Like, this is kind of taking it right down to the very nitty-gritty, like day-to-day stuff. And even though it might not, you know, necessarily have that bigger impact, you know, immediately, or be addressing systemic change, if enough of us start to look at, well, what can we actually do within the limitations that we might have, and just starting to make those choices to do them, I think it can just help to give you that little bit of empowerment that you are actually able to do something on a day-to-day basis that is contributing.
Alice, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think two things, basically kind of going back to second wave feminist consciousness raising is, I think, you know, if you can just use, you know, wherever you are present and active to bring up conversations about ableism, to talk to people, to educate them. So whether it's Facebook, Twitter, niche hobby communities, TikTok, whatever it is, just to talk about it more so that it becomes present in more people's mind and answer questions. And also, I don't know if the person who asked this question is disabled or not. This would only be a recommendation for a disabled person, but I have encountered so many people with invisible disabilities and chronic illnesses who are hesitant to use the label disabled. And so I think we need strength in numbers. So if you are a disabled person and you have friends who you care about who, you know, are chronically ill, but have some reservations about using the term disabled, to try and encourage them to embrace it. Also, because in my experience, many chronically ill people would say, oh, I have this health condition, it limits me in all these ways, but it's not severe enough for me to say I'm disabled. You know, like I can't work, but it's not severe enough for me to say I'm disabled. So, you know, that there was this almost trauma response of being like, oh, I'm not really a disabled person because a disabled person must have it worse than me.
Okay.
And I was like, just embrace the label. We need strength in numbers. But obviously, that's only an action I recommend disabled people to take.
Thanks so much. Katrina and then Kat, please. And then I'll bring the meeting to a close if that's okay. We've already overrun a little bit, so my apologies for that. But I really wanted to hear from people about active travel.
Yeah, I think when we talk about kind of like system change over individual change, I think that it is really common for loads of people, like disabled and non-disabled people alike, if you kind of say like, you know, you using a keep cap and blah blah, like actually isn't going to create long-lasting change because of the systems that we live in. It can be super disheartening, and you're like, well, what can I do as one person? And often the answer is like, honestly, as one person, not much. But as a group, collective power, so much. There's so much you can do. And I think that, while I'm not saying like don't make lifestyle changes that you're able to, like obviously like those are still like nice and good, like you can do them. And I definitely like agree with like, yeah, talking to people. I think if you're able, join a group that is like campaigning, that's lobbying, that's organizing, and that's like kind of finding those other levers of power to create change, like wider, broader change. And obviously, like, I know we then get these issues where loads of groups aren't accessible. And I think that that is like, yeah, a bigger conversation to have and what we can do around that. But I think, yeah, trying to join groups and making change within those groups, yeah, just, yeah, working together is always going to be more powerful than trying to make change just as an individual.
As an individual, perfect. Kat, your final reflections, and then I'll bring the meeting to a close.
Yes, thank you. I think that's such an amazingly good question. But just like Katrina said, working together is the way to do this. And so joining with other groups, whether it's a Friends of the Earth Scotland group, if you've got a local one, or if you're in a disabled people's organisation, joining SCCS and working with us, or joining the COP26 coalition, which is working towards COP itself. And with a lot of organisation going on, we've got working groups there that would be really amazing if you wanted to join. The second thing was about working with the divest movement. I mean, that's one of the best things to do, is to, where's the money going? Where's the money in your pension going, if you have one? Or where's other money going from investment? You can join with the divest campaigners yourself, or you can actually just challenge it as an individual, your bank or your pension provider or whoever it is, and do it that way, because that tackles directly the systems and the kind of financing of this stuff. And then I'm going to post you a little link, and this is a how to get involved, right? So we've got this on our website, the Climate Fringe website, and this is all about COP itself and how to be involved in kind of making a difference around COP. So there's things like coming to events, organising your own events, getting involved in these working groups that I said from the COP26 coalition and becoming like an organiser and joining us. Also, there's just loads of things there. So please do have a look at that and give you some ideas. But as it's all about collective action, this has got to be done together. And, you know, us in partnership, us in the kind of environment movement in partnership with you in the disability movement, that is how we're going to get it done.
Great. Perfect place to finish, I think. Thank you so much to everybody for listening and contributing and putting ideas in chat and linking with each other and giving of your time today. We really appreciate it. We know that Zoom is not the ideal for many people, and to be honest, I would love to have an event where I could meet you all in person, but obviously that's not possible at the moment. So thank you so much for giving of your time. Thank you so much to the panel. I really appreciate it. I thought your contributions and thoughts and ideas were extremely useful to us, and just really switched on, to be honest. So fantastic. Thank you very much. And last thank you to the team at Inclusion Scotland. These events often create a lot of work for other people, so I really appreciate the support from Lynn, Rebecca and Janice today, so thank you very much. We'll be in touch with all of you if that's okay. Please feel free to contact me and let me know if you don't want any more information about our work on climate change, but I'd like to keep you updated with the work that we're doing. We're planning a report on climate change and disability ahead of COP26. We've applied for observer status at COP26 to try and be a part of the event and kind of be cognizant of climate change negotiations and decisions. We're working in collaboration with other disability organisations to try and create a caucus for disabled people to be a legitimate part of the UN climate change processes. And so we're doing a lot of work to try and make sure that disabled people are actually heard on many of these issues, but there's so much work to do. I mean, just listening to you today and particularly talking about active travel and spaces for people, there's so much work to do. So I look forward to working in partnership with many of you, and I'll shut up now and let you all go. So thank you so much for your attendance today, and I'll be in touch.